He didn't become this way overnight. That's the lie everyone tells themselves because it's comforting. It's easier to believe that something snapped, that a single moment broke him, that madness arrived suddenly like a storm. But the truth is quieter than that. It's slower and much more unsettling. Long before anyone noticed anything was wrong, he was already learning how to disappear while standing right in front of people. He learned it early, the way some children learn how to read a room before they learn how to read words. He could sense tension the way others sense temperature, a slight shift in tone, a pause that lasted half a second too long, a look that meant something wasn't safe anymore. Nobody called it trauma back then. They called it growing up fast. They called it being mature for his age. They called it handling things well. And he believed them. What they didn't see was the constant calculation happening behind his eyes. The way every interaction felt like a test he hadn't studied for. The way he learned to edit himself in real time, removing parts that felt risky, sanding down anything that might cause friction. Over time, this didn't make him adaptable. It made him hollow. He became very good at being what was needed. So good, in fact, that he slowly forgot what he actually was. There's a dangerous idea people repeat without realizing how harmful it is. The idea that strong people don't break, that resilience means endurance, that if you can survive something, you've somehow conquered it. But endurance without release doesn't make you stronger. It just teaches your mind to store pain in places you don't know how to reach later. For him, pain didn't arrive as screaming or chaos. It arrived as silence, as unanswered questions, as a constant sense that something was missing, but no language to describe what that something was. He felt different, but not special, just misaligned, like a piece placed into the wrong puzzle and forced to fit anyway. As he grew older, people started complimenting him for being calm, grounded, rational. They didn't know that calmness was not peace, it was a survival strategy, a way to keep the world predictable, because unpredictability had taught him one thing very clearly. It always came at a cost. Inside, his thoughts never really stopped moving. They looped, replayed, rewrote conversations that had already ended, imagined alternative versions where he said the right thing, reacted the right way, became the right version of himself. To others, he seemed thoughtful. To himself, he felt trapped inside a mind that never truly rested. There's a moment in many lives where cracks start to show, not loudly, subtly. For him, it showed up as exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, as a strange detachment from moments that were supposed to matter. Birthdays, achievements, milestones. He was there, but not really there. Like someone watching their own life through slightly fogged glass. People around him began using a phrase that sounded harmless. "You've changed." They said it casually, without accusation, but every time he heard it, something tightened inside his chest, because he wanted to ask a question he didn't yet know how to phrase. Changed from what? From who I was pretending to be? Or from who I never got the chance to become? He started feeling like his own memories didn't belong to him, like they were scenes from a movie he'd watched too many times. The emotions were there, but muted, flattened. And in their place was something colder, more analytical. A voice that observed everything, but felt almost nothing. This is where people usually get it wrong. They imagine going crazy as chaos, as losing control, as emotion spilling over. But for him, it was the opposite. It was control tightening its grip so hard that nothing could breathe anymore. He began questioning things that most people never stop to question. Not big philosophical questions, but small, unsettling ones. Why does everyone seem so certain about who they are? Why do emotions appear so easily for others but feel rehearsed for me? Why does silence feel louder than noise? The world started feeling staged. Conversations sounded scripted. Smiles felt practiced. He knew this wasn't logical, but logic stopped being the point. The problem wasn't what he thought, it was how intensely real those thoughts felt. And here's the part almost no one talks about. He didn't want attention. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't even want answers. What he wanted was relief. A moment where his mind would stop pulling him apart in slow, invisible ways. Instead, life kept demanding performance. Be productive, be grateful, be normal. So he complied. On the outside, he became even more functional, more disciplined, more impressive. People pointed to him as an example, someone who had been through a lot and still turned out fine. But inside, something fundamental was eroding. The sense of continuity, the feeling that yesterday, today, and tomorrow belonged to the same person. He began feeling fragmented, as if different versions of himself took turns operating the same body. Sometimes he'd look at his own reflection and feel nothing. Not dislike, not fear, just unfamiliarity, as if he were observing a stranger who happened to share his face. That's when the past started resurfacing in unexpected ways, not as clear memories, but as sensations. A tightening in the chest for no obvious reason, a sudden wave of anger that didn't match the situation, a deep sadness that arrived without a story attached to it. The mind has a strange way of keeping score. It remembers what we refuse to process. It keeps receipts for every moment we told ourselves, it's not that bad, when it actually was. He had spent years minimizing his own experiences, comparing them to others, convincing himself he had no right to feel the way he did. And in doing so, he taught his mind one dangerous lesson: your pain is invalid. Invalid pain doesn't disappear, it transforms. Slowly, his inner world became more intense than the outer one. Thoughts felt sharper than reality. Ideas carried more weight than people. He started trusting his internal logic more than external reassurance, not because he believed he was smarter, but because his inner voice had been the only consistent presence in his life for a very long time. And that's how isolation truly begins. Not when you're alone, but when your mind becomes the only place that feels coherent. People noticed he was more distant now, more withdrawn. Some interpreted it as arrogance, others as coldness. Few considered the possibility that he was simply overwhelmed by an internal world that no longer followed ordinary rules. He wasn't losing his mind. He was losing his anchor. Every human needs something that grounds them, a sense of safety, a sense of being seen, a sense that their inner experience has a place in the world. When that anchor erodes slowly enough, you don't notice it disappearing. You only notice when you're suddenly drifting. He began constructing explanations for his own thoughts, patterns, theories, narratives that made his internal chaos feel structured. And structure felt like relief. Even if those explanations were flawed, they gave him something he hadn't felt in years: stability. This is the paradox few people understand. When someone's thinking starts to drift away from shared reality, it often doesn't feel confusing to them. It feels clarifying, simplifying, like finally everything makes sense in a way it never did before. That's why reasoning alone rarely pulls someone back, because the shift didn't happen in logic, it happened in meaning. His past wasn't brutal because it was dramatic. It was brutal because it taught him to survive by disconnecting, to observe instead of feel, to endure instead of process. And over time, that strategy stopped being protective and started being destructive. But here's the uncomfortable truth. What people label as crazy is often a mind that adapted too well to an unhealthy environment and never learned how to come back. And the most frightening part isn't how far a person can drift. It's how long they can function while doing it. Because from the outside, he still looked fine. The shift didn't announce itself with drama. There was no clear breaking point, no single day he could circle and say, that's when it happened. Instead, it arrived the way rust does, quietly, gradually. By the time you notice it, it's already everywhere. What changed first was his relationship with time. The past stopped feeling finished, and the future stopped feeling real. Everything collapsed into an endless present where his thoughts replayed the same patterns again and again, each loop slightly altered, slightly more intense. He wasn't remembering the past anymore. He was reliving fragments of it without context, without narrative, without relief. He began to realize something unsettling. The strategies that once kept him safe were now isolating him. Emotional distance, hyper-control, constant self-monitoring. These had been useful once. They had helped him navigate a world that didn't feel predictable. But now, they were cutting him off from the very things that make a person feel human. Connection, spontaneity, trust. The irony was painful. The more he tried to protect himself, the more fragile everything became. His mind, once sharp and observant, started turning inward with too much force. Thoughts that were once background noise became central characters. Every idea demanded attention. Every feeling demanded explanation. He started assigning meaning where there might not have been any. A glance felt loaded, a pause felt intentional. Silence felt like a message. It wasn't paranoia in the way people imagine it. It was pattern hunger, a mind trained for survival, trying desperately to make sense of an overwhelming internal landscape. At first, these interpretations felt empowering. He felt alert, awake, as if he could finally see beneath the surface of things. There was a sense of clarity in believing that nothing was random, that everything connected. It gave his suffering a shape, and shape felt manageable. But clarity without grounding is a dangerous thing. Gradually, the gap between his internal explanations and shared reality widened. Conversations became harder to navigate, not because he didn't understand words, but because he felt like he was operating on a different frequency. He noticed details others didn't comment on. He reacted to subtext others didn't perceive. And when he tried to explain, the words never quite landed. So he stopped trying. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't protective. It was heavy, loaded. The kind of silence where thoughts echo too loudly and there's no external sound strong enough to interrupt them. He spent more time alone, not because he preferred it, but because interaction now felt exhausting. Too many variables, too much unpredictability. His inner world, once a refuge, started feeling crowded. There's a misconception that people who lose touch don't question what's happening to them. In reality, he questioned it constantly. Am I thinking clearly? Is this reasonable? Why does this feel so real? That questioning didn't save him. It just added another layer of tension. A mind arguing with itself has no neutral judge, and beneath all of it was something much older. Something unresolved. The accumulation of years spent invalidating his own emotional experience. Years of telling himself to move on, to be grateful, to stop overthinking. Years of believing that if he just tried harder, felt less, adapted more, things would finally settle. They didn't, because pain that isn't acknowledged doesn't disappear. It reorganizes itself. The past began demanding attention in indirect ways, not as memories, but as themes: abandonment, control, invisibility, safety. These ideas threaded themselves into his thinking, shaping how he interpreted the present. He wasn't stuck in the past. The past was leaking into everything else. This is where the line people call crazy often appears. Not at the start of suffering, but at the point where the mind can no longer hold everything alone, where internal explanations grow louder because no external validation ever arrived. From the outside, it looked like he was drifting. From the inside, it felt like he was finally responding to something that had been ignored for too long. He wasn't broken, he was overloaded. There were moments of lucidity that frightened him more than the confusion, moments when he could see the distance between himself and others, between his thoughts and shared reality. Those moments carried a sharp awareness that something was wrong, but awareness alone didn't come with instructions. It didn't tell him how to bridge the gap, so he oscillated between insight and overwhelm, between clarity and confusion, between wanting help and not knowing how to ask for it without feeling exposed. The world has little patience for invisible struggles. When behavior doesn't fit expectations, labels appear quickly: difficult, detached, unstable. Rarely do people ask what a person had to endure to arrive at this point. Rarely do they consider that what they're seeing might be the final chapter of a much longer story. He had spent a lifetime being functional, reliable, adaptable, and when that finally cracked, there was no language for what came next. Only judgment, only distance, only the subtle message that whatever he was experiencing was inconvenient. That message cut deeper than anything else. Because the truth is, what pushed him furthest away from himself wasn't his thoughts. It was the absence of safety, the absence of a space where his internal world could be explored without fear of dismissal, without being reduced to a label. And here's the part that almost never gets said: recovery, if it comes at all, doesn't look like returning to who you were before. That version of him was built around survival, around endurance, around silence. There was nothing to go back to. Healing, in its truest form, meant something much harder. Learning how to feel without collapsing. Learning how to exist without constant self-monitoring. Learning how to let his mind rest without needing to control every outcome. It meant facing the past not as a series of events, but as a set of lessons his nervous system had memorized. It meant understanding that his mind didn't betray him. It protected him the only way it knew how. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable realization of all, that what we call losing it is often a sign that the old strategies no longer work, that the mind is asking for a different kind of care, a different kind of attention, not suppression, not correction, but understanding. He wasn't a cautionary tale. He was a reflection of something deeply human, the cost of emotional neglect, the consequences of endurance without support, the danger of confusing functionality with well-being. And if there's anything to be learned from his story, it's this. Minds don't unravel because they're weak. They unravel because they've carried too much for too long, without being allowed to put anything down. What people saw as madness was in many ways a delayed reaction, a system finally saying, I can't do this alone anymore. And maybe the real question isn't why someone goes this far. Maybe the question is how often we miss the signs long before they get there.